lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name's Ryan. I'm back with an indie creator spotlight, which when I was looking, I realized I haven't done one in quite some time, but I'm really happy to be back doing it. And who better to have on than Morgan Herron himself? Cosmic Line Productions, Frankie Boy Monster, awesome book. We got to meet each other at IC3, which was super cool. So I'm super stoked to have you on finally, dude.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate being on. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, so I tried not to ask you too many questions in person that I would have asked you on here, So well,
We were hanging out. It's cool.
first off, I think you said, if I remember correctly, that this book was printed, you were 18 when it was,
Yeah.
and you're 19 now. So obviously, like, we grew up in different eras, so I was kind of curious, like, how did you get into comics and kind of what started off that, like, love for this amazing medium?
Yeah, for me, like all the stuff was that I got into that eventually led me to comics was kind of adjacent to comics. So like cartoons, animated shows of like Disney Channel had this adjacent channel called Disney XD, which was more geared towards like guys, and they would play like their Marvel animated shows, reruns of other stuff like Spider-Man, His Amazing Friends, Spectacular Spider-Man, which was my favorite Spider-Man cartoon growing up, Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes, and then like on Cartoon Network they would play reruns of like Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, JLU, stuff like that. So like I got this impression of like the big two characters from those cartoons, and then I realized, oh, there's comics of these fun things I love watching that planted seeds for when I would eventually read the actual comics when I was like 12 or 13. So I was more in my teens when I actually got to comic books.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Look, I mean, like, again, the generational gap between us. I mean, first of all you you coming into cartoons, like, they were all available to you. For
Yeah.
me, it was like I watched Batman when it first came out, and then you had to wait for Superman, and then Justice League. Like, I mean, man, I was already probably starting high school when
Yeah.
Justice League came out. So like all those cartoon series, like, super like influential to me. But like I mean, I remember being like hungry for more content, like by the time you're doing it, it's like this content's already existing, which is I'm kind of jealous of. But it also it's kind of cool in that sense, because by the time you got into comic books, it wasn't as readily available everywhere like it was when I
Yeah.
was a kid. Like, I'm sure you've heard, like, the grocery stores, 7-Elevens,
Yeah.
everywhere. You could find them anywhere. So like
Which
you'd
makes
have
me
to
so mad.
you know what? It kind of frustrates me, dude, because like I feel like there might be, I don't want to say there would be, but there might be more comic book readers,
Yeah.
younger readers, if it was like, kid going down the aisle, like, sees a comic book and grabs it, right? Like, you just don't have that way of finding it. So what kind of prompted you to go into that comic book store the first? Is that how you got,
Well,
like, or
funny enough, like again, it's so weird, but like it's never been tied to comics directly. Cause like I finally found like comic books in my local Books A Million and Barnes and Nobles. Cause they were, the trades were a big part of the market by the time I was coming up. So like single issues were actually very alien to me. The first comic book I actually read was Scott Snyder's The Court of Owls, Volume One. And that actually had a really big impact on me because like I love Greg Capullo's work. I actually tried to draw like him for a little bit, but I didn't. I didn't realize that the reason why I enjoyed it so much is because of the storytelling they did. In a later chapter of The Court of Owls, there's this whole issue where Batman was stuck in the Court of Owls maze and he was losing his mind slowly but surely because he had been poisoned by them. And Greg Capullo and Scott Snyder came up with this idea of just turning the comic
yeah,
book around. So you'd have to flip it around. Then I got confused and it just made me dizzy, but it communicated this effect that Batman was feeling, and that always stuck with me. And I was like, man, if this is what comics is, I want to be on board with this.
yeah.
And then I discovered Batman Hush and a couple of other trades. And then it wasn't long till I kind of fizzled out of Big Two stuff. But I was more of a DC guy back then.
So, yeah, I think I've kind of always leaned just a little bit more towards DC. It's funny that you mentioned that scene with, Greg Capullo, because like that, to me, just what you said encapsulates perfectly why comic books are amazing. You can't do that in a movie. You
No.
can't get that point across. It just wouldn't hit the same way, right? Like those specific, like, visual aesthetics and the way you can move a scene and the way you can do some like just really weird shit. That is a really good comic. But when did you, because obviously I've told you in person, like I see certain artists like within your style, but like
Yeah,
which artists besides Greg Capullo, because you say
yeah,
for a bit of each other drama, which ones are
yeah.
super influential to you?
Yeah, so Greg Capullo, although I don't draw necessarily like him, but I still actually catch myself. You know that how he'll draw a swooping nostril like a lightning bolt? I'll
Yeah.
I'll still catch myself doing that, actually. More for storytelling though, definitely Mike Mignola, because after like to kind of go back to what I said about fizzling out with like Big Two stuff, once I was starting to fizzle out and I was like, I want to stay reading comics, but I don't know what to read, and I'm just not feeling like I don't really want to read a lot of Big Two stuff right now. And my friend Paul Fortner, back in high school, he was a junior, I was a sophomore. He told me to read Hellboy by Mike Mignola. He said the whole story arc, the main story arc, is in our local library, so go check it out. And I was kind of apprehensive at first because like my interpretation of Mignola's work was just kind of, I don't know, it didn't scare me, but it made me kind of uncomfortable in the sense I was like, this is what a comic can be, you know? Like I don't know, it was a weird impression of like his visual style on my mind. But then I actually read it. I wasn't as impressed with Seed of Destruction because it felt a little too wordy. Not that that always turns me off, but
I
like,
mean, that was John Byrne, but
yeah, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
yeah, for sure. No, no, no. I know that. The visual storytelling was Mignola, which was that part of it was fantastic. But like I don't know, the wordiness kind of just was like, I don't know. But
Mm-hmm.
then I got to Wolves of St. August by that next part of the trade, and I was on board. Like it was atmospheric, it was interesting, it made me want to read more. And then I shotgunned the rest of the run those next couple of weeks at my library, which was pretty fantastic. More and more, like I'm influenced by more of the contemporary indie scene, whether that's Step at Skybound, Image, or even like some of the guys we met at IC3. Like I'm always buying Mighty Keen's stuff. I love his work. In fact, that's why I opted for Frankie to be that size, because I like once I got here on campus at MTSU, I I wanted to like bring comics with me to read in between like waiting for classes, and like I took a bunch of his, and I always enjoyed reading his stuff before my classes, and it made me realize, oh, this size is very travel friendly, unlike your actual standard size. So I wanted, and because my book is all ages, I wanted to account for adults and kids. So I figured this size would be travel friendly if you're an adult going to like your workplace, or if you're a kid going to the playground, you know. So
I do like at first when I saw I love Monty Keem. Obviously, everybody knows I have a fucking playlist of
yes.
his stuff on here. I dig the format because you know what? It's like, and first of all, it's like almost similar in size to manga, right? A little bit,
Yeah.
not quite the same size, but
Yeah.
yeah, it is good pocket size. It is like it's one that at first I was like hesitant towards because like I'm stuck in my ways and I don't,
Yeah.
like I've been reading comics so long that like even when it's like a book is like magazine format, I'm like, fuck, dude. Like it annoys me because it's like it doesn't, you have to get different boxes and stuff. Which by the way, Marty, if you're listening to this, we need a box this size that you should start selling on your website. Anyways, I before we get into your book, I do want to ask, I think it's interesting that like you quickly wanted to get out of the big two stuff. What was the reason that like you got bored so quickly with it? I don't
I
know if
don't
bored's
know.
the right way to say it, but like, I
Yeah.
mean,
And I mean, that's not to say like I sworn off Big Two altogether. Like I'm not
yeah,
this alternative guy who's like, I will never read a Big
sure.
Two book another day in my life. Like I actually recently bought all of Mike Mignola's Cosmic Odyssey, and I'm going through that. So like there are definitely like, but it was just because like where we're kind of at, like I'm at that time I was a 14 to 15-year-old kid who was trying to read stuff that required basically an almost 90-year-old like legacy in history, you know? And like
Mm,
I had to do so much Googling because you can't buy every single comic on the planet. You know what I'm saying? Like I had to
yep.
do so much research just to catch up with other things I had to read and missed out on. And then it started to feel gimmicky. And then also like Big Two fandom can really be toxic. You know, it can be
Yep.
very, I don't know, it can be very, I'd say childish, which is funny because we're talking about comic books, but it can
Yeah,
just be
there's also a lot of
crazy.
gatekeeping with older fans sometimes. I worked in a
Yeah,
shop. I watched one guy after
gosh,
this girl left. She was looking, oh dude. I won't get
it's
too into it,
crazy.
but there was this girl that asked a question to me and I answered, you know, she was looking for something. It was based on somebody that was a character that's in a movie. And then he's like, "See, that's what's wrong with like they only come in because of this." I'm like, dude, like that's what we want, right? Like we want the
You're
fan base.
alienating your
Yeah, we
customer
want
base.
fan base to continue to grow. And that dude's face got so red. He was a regular too. His face got so red, and he bought his stuff, and then he left. And then every time he
Jeez.
came back in, I fucking just completely shit on him because I wanted him to feel bad. But I totally, you know what, you saying that makes sense because like that is a huge argument that it almost feels impenetrable to get into
Yeah,
Marvel comics because first of all, like, yeah, you like you mentioned like kind of like I don't want to say evergreen titles, but ones that you could read that kind of feel one and done where you don't need to know a ton of backstory.
yeah,
But indie stuff is always a little bit easier to jump into because there's not this like long history.
yeah. But man, gosh, I'm having, I feel like I'm fighting stores though to get my indie title into stores. There's this problem I'm running into where like some retailers, and I'm not saying this is all retailers, but like here in Tennessee, I don't know, it's just comics is already a small niche thing, and comics here in Tennessee, which is kind of a comics desert, it's even harder when you're an indie title because they want to buy the bigger titles that sell somewhat more consistently.
Right.
It's a little bit, I guess, scarier, or also, I don't know, they just don't like the idea of like something outside the big two on their shelves. You know,
It's
I
a
feel like I'm
shame.
fighting that as well. I know there's a lot of shops that aren't like that. Unfortunately, I live in a state where that is not an option for me, or at least all the cities I've lived in within Tennessee and here in the South have kind of been that way.
It is a shame that more stores don't kind of support that kind of scene. You know, like when I go
Yeah,
out of state, that's what I look for, right? Like I
yeah,
want to see if there's any local creators because not just because somebody's indie doing their own stuff doesn't necessarily even mean they have an online presence, right? Sometimes people are just making comics and they're selling them to stores, and that's the only way you can
yeah,
discover them. But I think that more and more, you know, through Kickstarter, obviously, you know, you and I were at IC3. There are so
yeah,
many people out there producing really dope comics that
yeah,
there's a book for everybody. It's kind of like whatever, you know, I know it's cliche to say that, but there really is, you know.
yeah. No, I totally disagree, and it's just frustrating hearing like, gosh, I don't burn me at the stake, guys, but I'm just tired of hearing like people 40 to like 60 complaining that there's nothing good to read when, and you try to suggest, hey, like you should read this title. It's not Marvel and DC, but you should check it out anyways if you like this, and this. But they're still like, they still don't want to give it a chance, even though they're complaining about Batman and Spider-Man, but they've been complaining about Batman and Spider-Man not being what it was for 30 years now. You
Yeah.
know, it's just,
Yeah.
it's insane.
I
It's
mean, yeah, I'm getting close to
difficult.
I'm getting close to 40, so I hate sometimes like that there
I'm
is that.
sorry. I'm
It's okay.
sorry.
It's okay.
I just
No, it's fine. I hear you though. I
frustrating.
mean, I used to have to hear it in the shop. There would be people
Yeah.
even that were, yeah, I guess it's crazy. My age, that'd be like, oh man, I wish comics would just be like they were like in the 90s. I just want to see like, you know, some fighting and stuff going on. I don't want to see all this other stuff. I'm like, well, dude, like comics have to evolve, man. You know, the
Yeah.
comics from the golden age aren't the same as the silver age. And then if you
No,
keep going and you keep looking at stuff, the silver age to the bronze age to the modern age, like
because
things
culture
evolve.
changes as well. I
Exactly. You
mean,
can't if you can't just be stuck in your old ways. People need to be able to like branch out. But there's a fan base that just like only reads DC or Marvel
yeah,
or one or
yeah,
the other, right? Like that there is a lot of those customers in the comic shop. I think that this is probably to me, besides like the 80s and the black and white boom, right? Like this is the most like plethora of indie stuff that you could get because after that
yeah,
you know, implosion because like of the speculator market in the 90s, a
yeah,
lot of those small people publishers kind of went away and now we're seeing in my eyes we're seeing a resurgence.
yeah.
I do want to ask though, when did you decide that you wanted to make comic books?
I definitely had a case where like I did it more as a hobbyist. I would draw like comic strips of like my old dog, who was a miniature schnauzer in middle school. I also, obviously, like when I was a 4-year-old kid, I kind of fell into that trope of like the 4-year-old obsessed with dinosaurs. So I made a lot of crayon drawn dinosaur comics. But then I didn't take it seriously till freshman year, which was right before COVID had happened. I was also running cross country, but I was taking more art classes, and I realized, man, like I really like drawing. I want to make my own comics. Like I want to tell stories. I didn't realize like that's what I wanted to do. Like I say that more in like retrospect, but I realized I had this hunger to want to tell a story, but I couldn't articulate it that that's what I wanted to do yet. So then after cross country practices, I would like go to bookstores, get a couple of whatever comics I could afford. I would try to copy panels. I would try and draw stuff. I would try to look up videos on how to draw figures better, all this stuff. And then COVID happened, and we were all stuck. And I mean, everyone who's a cartoonist that kind of came out of that COVID era was just drawing and grinding. And in my case, like I wasn't I was definitely like nowhere near the level of any of those guys when they started. I was still like learning and absorbing things. So, like my art then is just garbage. It's your first like 10,000 crappy drawings or whatever. A lot more copying than creating my own stuff. And then I started creating my own stuff during lockdown, and I kind of kept doing that once quarantine stopped. But it was idea after idea after idea out of my sketchbook, and I wasn't really making pages. So by the time I got to my late sophomore year, I was finally starting to do a couple page short stories. Like I did a 1-page samurai story. I started recreating a couple pages from The Dark Knight Returns, trying to like figure out like what people were doing. Then I started doing like more 3 to 4 to 8 page stories up until my junior year. Yeah, and then I started to get more confident in what I was doing. Yeah.
Let's talk about, Frankie Boy Monster. When does the idea for that book come to you? And what came first? Your idea for the book? Well, no, you're not your idea, but like, did you produce the book before going to Cosmic Lion?
So in my case, that's actually kind of part of that complicated story of like struggling and redrawing things.
Mm-hmm.
It actually no, I kept doing that till I went to Heroes Con. So the last thing I was working on was going to be this rock and roll story. And I brought my last portfolio before that, which was this caveman story about like a caveman and his son fighting dinosaurs. And that was like a 22-page comic that I drew on 11 by 17. I got that portfolio reviewed by Brian Stelfreeze, who gave me a lot of good constructive criticism on that one. And then was telling me, and also gave me similar criticism on the next thing I was working on. But both of those stories, like I realized I wasn't really being true to myself in terms of like the subject matter I wanted to draw.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you know, my style is very graphic and shapy, kind of like a Mike Mignola.
Yeah.
And I was worried that if I started to do the whole like drawing monsters thing, people were going to put me in this box that I'm just a Mignola ripoff. But I knew like in here, I wanted to do a story with like monsters and like kitschy monster stuff. Cause like like one of my favorite cartoons growing up was like, Scooby-Doo,
Mm-hmm.
And also I did like the Secret Saturdays and stuff like that. So I wanted to do something with monsters, but I was like too afraid to do it. And I was kind of being dishonest with myself as well. So, but those projects all fell apart after I met Eli at Heroes Con, and I was frustrated. I didn't draw pages for like 2 weeks. I was just trying to like kind of regain the confidence again until I remembered this character that I drew my sophomore year of high school named Frankie. Now he was actually going to be more like a big hulking detective, kind of like a Hellboy, but when I kind of look back, I was like, why didn't I make him a kid? I don't know why that thought occurred to me, but I was like, why shouldn't he be a kid? And so I drew him as this awkward 12-year-old like monster boy with like Popeye sized arms.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I like this a lot better. This feels right. This feels like me. And then that gave me the idea of like, oh, if he has who's his dad? And then I came up with his mad scientist father, Dr. Fritz Lang, named after the German expressionist filmmaker of Metropolis and such. Yeah, and then once I came up with that and I drew those two drawings, which I'll pull out a little bit. I drew the first short story, and then I remember this vampire character I created my junior year of high school named Drake, and I revived him for this thing because he was going to have his own story, which now his backstory is now kind of it's reformulating in my notebook right now at the moment. But I reintroduced him into what I was doing with Frankie, and then after I drew that first short story, the other two came about, and then once I finished those two, I started to realize where I wanted to take the story and for the main storyline.
Yeah, I mean, dude, it's a fun book. I think it's cool the fact that you made it an all ages book. So I think it's safe to say this is the first all ages book from Cosmic
Yeah,
Books,
it is. It is.
right?
It's
Yeah.
it is the first. And I think it's the only now Eli though is investing in more like teen plus titles, which is very smart because of like manga right now. Like it's weird that like adults are now comfortable with their kids reading like teen plus stuff, which that's actually what American comics is, but manga seems to be a lot more friendly. And like I know again talking about retailers again, like retailers are so livid about manga and they say it's so undetailed, it's not good. And it's just like well then how come they're buying that and not Spider-Man, you know?
Yeah, I think that look, I think it's the fastest growing market. It's there's the facts to prove it, right? There's the numbers that prove it that the YA genre manga are doing better than American comics or just a regular American comics. It's
Yeah,
just a
no,
fact,
it's a
like
fact.
you got like first of all you got Dave Pilkey, all right?
Yeah.
I mean
Yeah.
he sells more him and Raina Telgemeier separately
I
sell
was like
more than any of the
yeah,
big names in comics.
I was a Captain Underpants kid.
Dude,
I should have mentioned
I
that,
remember
but
picking that
yeah,
first book up. That when it first came out, dude, I had that book, and I
awesome.
recreated the comics that what's the names? Harold and what's the other kid's name?
George.
George. I recreated that comic within that when I was a kid. I
Oh,
redrew
cool.
everything, and then no, I don't
That's
have it
funny.
anymore. But I love that book, and it's crazy to see how Dog Boy and Smile by Raina Telgemeier, all the books that she does, like it is
Yeah.
cool to see it because I feel like maybe this is the way that we get new comic book readers, and eventually maybe
Yeah.
they will graduate to. I mean, obviously, like I've met a lot of people around your age coming into a comic shop, and most of them are almost exclusively indie stuff. Like that's
Yeah.
just what kind of draws their attention, and I don't blame them. It goes back to what we said. It's very impenetrable, but I think that it is smart to in this market to be able to create a book that is all ages because you're not because it doesn't feel like it's a kid's book at
Yeah.
all, like not at
Yeah.
all. But you can hand it to a kid, and then you're opening up your audience.
I want to speak on that real quick, and I usually say this every time someone talks to me about it. It's the reason why it is all ages is because I was making something for 10-year-old me. Like I
Mhm.
talk about like all the cartoons I love. I just wanted to make something that like I could give to 10-year-old me and he'd be proud of where I am at now and that I would have been crazy about. Like Frankie Boy Monster, like his quote unquote, I guess, abilities is like he's literally an action figure. The reason why he can come apart and put them back together is because he is literally an action
That's
figure.
awesome. Yeah.
I actually helped turn him into a toy, but that's literally what he is. Like he's meant to be fun. I'm trying to make this character that's just fun and that hopefully kids and adults can resonate with. I want kids and the kids at heart to like him.
Yeah, I love, like I said, I love the book. Obviously, I said this before we hit the record, but we will be doing a creator commentary going through this book because it needs to be shown off. I think it's amazing. The I love the feel of the cover too. I don't know
Yeah,
what
that was
stock this.
Eli's idea.
Yeah, he's a mad genius, for sure.
I'm thankful to be working with him.
Yeah,
He's yeah, great.
I was super stoked. I loved it. I don't want to say I was there at the beginning, but him and I have become friends, over the past few years, like pre-COVID. I met him at the shop, and just watching him, it continued to just expand every year with more and more comic books, more and more content coming out. The
Yeah,
styles are all different. Nobody draws like each
the same.
other. It's
Yeah.
amazing. It's just amazing to see what's coming out of there. And I want to ask, like number one's been out for a little bit.
Yeah.
What's next on the horizon for you? I mean, obviously you've said that you have other ideas, but like is this kind of what you're going to be sticking with? Do you think maybe
Oh
you'll
yeah.
switch, maybe in between issues, you may
Yeah.
do something different? What's the plan?
Yeah. So honestly, like I'm just so invested in this world I'm creating right now. Like I love like the world of Frankie Boy Monster, and I'm still figuring out because it's not fully fleshed out. In fact, like I know a lot of people. I don't know if you hear this in a lot of interviews, but a lot of people say that are up and coming that like they get caught in this like world building trap or whatever.
Mhm.
For me, I've never got intimidated by that. Not because I think I'm better or anything. It's just for me, like I care more about characters than world building, both as a reader and a creator. Like I could care less how like detailed like your sci-fi world is. If your characters do not resonate with me, I don't care.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to emphasize and evoke character towards my readers, kind of actually like manga. That's what manga does. Paul Pope talked about that in a few of like his interviews. And I've not read a lot of manga, but like I do get that sense though that that's more important to them than just over detailing a building to make it like a building you've never seen before in your life. Like that's cool, but I would rather my characters resonate with someone for a long time than no one care.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, dude, look, I think it to me, it starts with character because like you said, like I've read comics where like the character is just like all right, I don't really care about them.
not likable.
Like I can appreciate that the art is good. I can
Yeah,
appreciate that like, the writing is sound, but like if I don't care about the character, then I don't want to read it because I don't feel invested in what I'm
or a
reading.
second time.
Or rereading it, like
Because honestly, that matters more than just reading it the first time and buying the book the first time in my eyes. Like
mhm.
I say this as a creator and a fan. Like I'm like Mighty Keen stuff, like his stuff, like I constantly reread. It's like not only just a source of inspiration, but like I'm invested in some of the characters he's made
Yeah.
too. Like and like then that pulls you into the world part. Like I don't think world building should be first on your list. If you want to do that, fine, but like I really do think once you start building characters, your world becomes a byproduct of well-written characters because that's what they inhabit.
I
That's
think
just
yeah,
my opinion.
yeah, no, I mean, I feel like Marty's told me this. I don't know if maybe I'm getting it wrong, but he like kind of lets the story. He doesn't like try to plan stuff out. He kind of
Yeah,
just lets things go where they go.
yeah.
And I think that you can feel that energy in the comic book because then you as he does, if the creator doesn't know where it's really going to go, right?
The reader
Then
won't.
it makes it for the reader to not know like what's going to happen. I've
Yeah,
told him every time I've read a book, I'm like, I didn't know it was going to go that way. And I like
yeah.
that feeling of not knowing and not being able to guess
And
the
old
ending.
comic books, from what I've been told, had that feeling.
Yes
That's
and
just
no.
what I've
It
been told.
depends. It depends on the story. But yeah, there's sometimes like even in modern stuff, I'll read it. I'm like, I know, like I can see kind of like where they're heading towards, like how this is gonna like play out. Maybe I don't
Yeah,
know every single story beat, but like it kind of takes away the joy of it.
yeah,
And if I that's how I decide whether or not because I read a ton. I'm looking around like I could be buried in my books, like there's so many of them. But that's how I decide whether or not like I'm gonna keep something in my collection. If I
yeah,
feel like I want to read it again and like I'll give myself a window. If I feel like I'll read it again within the next 5 years, which is a huge amount of time, I'm like, I'll
yeah,
keep it. But like, there's so much stuff where I'm like, I don't even think I'd want to read it again in 10. Like it
yeah,
was, it just didn't like resonate. And I think
yeah.
that should always kind of be maybe in the back of somebody's mind. Like, how can I make this an enjoyable experience to where somebody's gonna want to, dip back in again and
Because
continue to read it.
it can't just be short term. I really think like comics in both its creation and its marketing, I think is a long-term game, not
Mhm.
short-term. Like there needs to be a longevity to it. Like look at Jeff Smith's Bone. Like he
Yep.
created that and self-published that in the 90s, but he kept going and kept working on it. And then he landed the Scholastic deal, and now it's a perennial bestseller.
Hmm.
Though it was created originally in the 90s, but it still speaks to so many kids and adults and creators to this day. And it's a bestseller, and like he's a millionaire. And I'm not saying like I want to build up to like that success, but I'm just saying like there's a longevity in the life to this body of work he created,
Yeah.
a while back.
Hmm.
And I think creators need to think about that too, not just the 5-issue miniseries. Like they need to think about like their life's work and like the longevity of their career along with their books,
Yeah.
because you're going to be spending a lot of time with your books anyway. So, why shouldn't there be a long-term goal?
I totally agree. I totally agree, dude. What, like I said, when are we going to expect the next issue? What are you currently working on?
Frankie Boy Monster issue 2.
Okay.
I have 3 pages left to draw at the moment. Originally, I was aiming for late March, early April. With school and everything, that's just not gonna happen this time around, unfortunately. So I think we're gonna have to aim it for a late May, early June release, I think.
Okay.
But like if you follow me on Instagram, you'll know when it's about to be out. School and everything kind of just gets in the way of production because I am a college student. For anyone that's listening to this, and but Eli, he's so great to work with because like none of his stuff is deadline based. It's more quality based. Like whatever you put in, you're gonna get out of,
Hmm.
and he would rather us get it done when it gets done and it feel like our best work than it be then let deadlines like compromise our vision because he wants vision to be at the forefront, not just consistent sales, if that
Of,
makes sense.
of course. I mean, look, I mean, obviously, like the more you put out, right, the more you're
Mhm.
in like somebody's mind. Like if you look
Yeah,
like, or I'm just trying to compare like to Madi, right? Like I know we've mentioned him his
yeah,
name a lot of time, but he's put out so much content that he doesn't let people
yeah,
forget, you know, like, but you also don't want to rush something if it's not
yeah,
there, right? Like if you're not feeling it or you don't have the time, like you don't want to just put pencil to paper and then it not be your best work because like you said, talking about longevity and like you want to be proud of what you're putting out, right? Like you don't want to
yeah,
just like put something out that's like half-ass or you feel rushed because then you're not going
yeah,
to be happy with the finished product. But I'm excited
yeah.
for everything you got planned, dude. I'm excited to
Thank
see
you.
like what else you got in your head. I think that
Yeah,
you got a really good head on your shoulders. You have a like a self-awareness that I don't often see in people your age, you know, like I think that you feel like you have like an old soul when I'm talking to
I
you.
get that a lot. I get that a lot.
Yeah. So it's I'm very happy for you. I'm very, you know, you're an awesome dude and I'm excited to see what other comics you put out. So
Oh
for
man, thanks.
everybody listening and watching, if you could just tell them where they can find you online, where they can pick up the book, I'm going to drop all the links down below.
Yeah, you can pick up Frankie Boy Monster at cosmiclineproductions.com. There's actually two options to buy from. There's the printed book, which is $10. And then if you can't afford the printed book, don't worry. We have a $5 PDF. So you can just pay $5 and download the PDF and read it digitally. But we find that even if you get the PDF, people come back for the printed book. So yeah. And my Instagram is Herron_art. You can look Herron_ up on Instagram and it'll pull up, or Morgan B. Herron.
Awesome, dude. So everybody get out there, go buy the book, check out the rest of the Cosmic Lion production stuff on there. It's all a bunch of dope comics. And Morgan, I can't wait to do the creator commentary when we go through Frankie Boy Monster #1.
I appreciate it. Thank you.